Hi everybody. This is the cardiovascular system. It's the cardiovascular system includes the heart, the lungs, and I mean, kind of the lungs. It includes the lungs, but we're not going to be studying the respiratory part of it. We're just studying how the blood flows. But that includes the heart, and it includes all of the arteries and veins and capillaries. In addition to that, it includes factors that affect how blood moves around, such as pressure, blood volume, resistance, and then disease and exercise. And speaking of disease, we are going to be talking about one or two diseases that can affect blood flow. We need to be able to look at a diagram of the blood as it flows through the body and decide where is oxygen and where isn't. And then, just basically understand quite a bit about things like this. Now, we're going to start out with taking a look at the types of vessels that we have. There are kind of three types, although capillaries, yeah, capillaries really are a different type, but it's mostly arteries and veins. Arteries take blood away from the heart. That's how I remember this. A for away. Arteries go away from the heart. And so, as the blood moves away from the heart, it should have a lot of oxygen. That's kind of, if you're healthy, then your heart is pushing oxygenated blood out to your body. What's coming back is blood that has had low oxygen, and that's going to be what's in the veins. Some interesting things I want you to know. First of all, just because the vein looks blue in this picture doesn't mean that the blood is blue. Blood is not blue. Blood is either bright red, kind of like this color here, although that's not what I'm just using this as an example of a color. This isn't bright red blood, or to dark red, and that's it. The brighter the blood, it has oxygen in it. The darker the blood, it's missing oxygen, and that's what happens. Okay. Now, as blood moves through these arteries, remember this has the pressure on it, so it's a solid straight shot. There's nothing in there. I want you to see there's a little flap here. In arteries, there's not this little flap because the blood is being shoved, pushed, pumped to the body by the heart, a very powerful muscle, and it's moving that blood. It's just shooting it straight through here, and it puts a lot of pressure on the entire system, and it then moves it through the capillaries, which are incredibly thin. While this could be 30, 40, 50, 100 blood vessels wide or blood cells wide here, maybe even more than that. Over here, these capillaries, they get so thin, they're literally the width of one single blood cell. So the thing is the capillaries have to be everywhere. There's capillaries going to, I think I read somewhere, there's hardly a space that the size of a BB in your body that doesn't have a capillary near it. So you have these capillaries going everywhere. It's why if you ever get injured at all, you're going to bleed. Bleeding is one of the big things that happens, and it's also an important part of our healing, but that's another day. The capillaries, then they branch out. They go out to every part of your body, and they're exchanging the oxygen and other things. The blood is exchanging oxygen and other things with the cells that are found right there. And then one of the things that happens is they drop the oxygen, they pick up carbon dioxide, and they start to bring it back, right? So now this, as it comes back through the veins, it has low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. Then it goes into the heart. We're going to look at that in a minute. And then I'm going to the lungs, and the lungs take the carbon dioxide and out and put lung or oxygen back in. But here's an interesting thing. They all have muscle. Okay, it's called smooth muscle, and there are three types of muscle. You have cardiac muscle, you have smooth muscle, and you have that other muscle, which I forgot what it's called, but they all have smooth muscle cells around them. Now, what do muscles do? They help us to move things. Well, guess what? All of your arteries and veins have around them these muscles that allow them to get larger and smaller. It's called vasoconstriction. Okay, they, for whatever reason, for whatever they need, they can expand the size of this opening or constrict it, depending on need, right? And that depends on things like whatever you're doing. If you're relaxing, if you're laying around doing nothing, these tend to get larger. But if you are working, then these tend to get smaller because it lets them move more blood faster. If there's a smaller volume here, it means they can get the blood from here to here faster. And so being able to constrict these these arteries and these veins helps the blood to go faster, but it can also create a problem, as we'll talk about soon. So don't forget that these things can open and close depending on need. Now, another interesting thing that most people don't know, they just don't think about. The heart is very good at squeezing and pushing blood, but it's not very good at pulling the blood back in. And so the artery side is the high pressure side. It's very high pressure. Okay, this literally the heart squeezes and shoves blood all through the artery side of this system. However, the vein side is low pressure. I mean, it's not much lower, but it's low pressure, and you have all the resistance, all the friction of this moving through here, and it slows the blood down. And so one of the problems is that by the time the blood gets into the vein system, it's moving a little sluggishly, and the heart doesn't suck it back in. The heart simply contracts and then relaxes. Contracting shoves it down the arteries, but when it relaxes, it tries to pull it in from the veins, but it can be rather difficult. And now think about it. Your heart is almost to the very top of your body, at least way more than halfway up. Okay, and if you're sitting here right now, your heart is shoving blood down into your arteries, down into the rest of your body. But once it gets to the very bottom of your feet, for example, it's got to work its way all the way back up through the vein system to get back into your heart. And the problem is it doesn't move very well. I mean, it moves, but it doesn't move anywhere near as well as the arteries. And so the veins have a really couple of interesting things that happen to help push this blood back up to the heart. Okay, it would be so much better if the heart was down, somewhere around our toes or something, because it would work a lot easier. But because it's way up here in our chest cavity, it creates a situation where we've got to figure out how to get the blood from the bottom extremities back up to the heart. One of the things that it has is this little flap here. It's like a check valve, and as the blood moves past it, if in between heartbeats, because we're like shove, 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 the blood is moves and then stops, moves and then stops, and then moves and then stops. Okay, that's what's happening because your heart's beating. The same thing's kind of happening here. The pressure does push the blood on up here, so it moves and then stops, and moves and then stops, and it moves and then stops. But what we don't want it doing when it stops is starting to slide back down. So when it moves up here and it gets through this flap, it moves up, and then gravity does try to let it go back down, but this stops it. So this is called a check valve, and it helps. I don't know what it's really called, but it's a check valve, and it helps to keep the blood from sliding back down to the lower extremities in between heartbeats. Huge thing to help us get blood back up to our heart. Another thing is the veins tend to go through our large muscle groups, and our large muscle groups, if you contract your leg muscles and your butt muscles and your calf muscles, and you tighten up your stomach muscles, these things squeeze these veins and shove the blood up. Okay. And so that's a really important thing to know about your cardiovascular system, because when you're sitting in a desk for hours on end, your heart's really struggling to get all this blood. Your blood is starting to pool down in your lower extremities. It's called edema. And it's caused by a lot of things, but one of the main ones is the structure of our body. The heart's way up here, but all the blood's pooling down at the bottom. We need to get it back up to the top. Now, I do this all the time when I give these big, long, standardized tests, like the SAT or the ACT. You're sitting in a desk for 4 hours. They schedule in these times in which you get a break, but everybody just sits there, and I tell them this story that I'm telling you right now about the muscle, the veins moving. I tell them this whole story, and then I tell, look, you need to stand up right now and move around because all the blood is down in your feet. Well, where do you need the blood? You need it in your brain. So you need to get up and move around, and that starts contracting the muscles and pushing the blood back up to the top where it can be used again. Another thing you can do, and it may seem a little silly, but nobody will know if you don't make a face, but while you're sitting at a desk working, you can just kind of contract your muscles in your legs and in your stomach. Now, if you do it too hard, it looks like you got to go poop or something, but if you just kind of, with nobody looking, just kind of tighten up your leg muscles, tighten up your calf muscles, tighten up your stomach muscles, it will help push that blood back up too. And it'll invigorate you and actually help you to stay focused, because a lot of focusing problems that people have is based around the idea that they've been sitting for a while and the edema is putting all the blood down in their bottom, down towards their feet, and there's no movement of blood. The heart is working, is not pumping as much oxygenated blood, and you're starting to get tired. Okay, but if you do that clenching of your muscles, It helps to move the blood back up. And if you do it automatically, you won't even notice. And hopefully nobody else will, because it does look kind of funny. But it works. Okay, so trust me, something you need to know. Now, moving on, we're going to take a look at the heart, which of course the arteries are leaving the heart, and we have the same kind of a color thing here. The red has high oxygen, the blue has low oxygen. The aorta is the largest artery in the heart. Did everybody hear me say that? The aorta is the largest artery in the heart, and that's when all the blood that leaves the heart leaves out of the aortic valve and goes into the aorta, and that's just tons of pressure right there, and then it starts splitting apart and it goes to all these different places in your body. And so as the blood leaves the heart, it goes to the aorta, high pressure here, then it starts spreading out everywhere. So hold on, so right here, this could be right at the aorta, and then from here it goes out to the rest of the body, and it comes back through, and then all the blood goes into the heart through the superior vena cava. And the superior vena cava is where all of the veins kind of all come together right next to the heart, and the blood moves through. The low oxygen blood all comes back together to this one vein, the superior vena cava, and it goes into the heart. Now the inferior vena cava comes up here and ties into the superior right behind the heart. Now the inferior is the one coming from your lower extremities. That's where it all comes together. Actually, you know what? I lied to you a little bit. I'm sorry, I forgot. The inferior vena cava comes into the right atrium. The superior vena cava comes into the right atrium. They both come in together. I screwed that up, and I'm sorry. But they all come in together right here in the right atrium. So the inferior comes in this way, the superior comes in this way. And the superior is coming from your head and kind of your upper shoulder area, all through there. The inferior is coming from the rest of your body. Lots of blood flow coming in here. It's low oxygen. This is where we're going to start our journey. Okay, so from the body tissues to the right atrium. Now the word atrium means like the room before. Okay, if you've ever go to your house, to somebody's house, and they have an atrium, it's like a room before the room. That's where you're supposed to take your shoes off, or that kind of thing. If you're rich, you have an atrium. But we have atrium in our heart. We actually have two. This is where the blood enters. The low oxygen blood enters the heart, okay, from the superior and the inferior vena cava, the right atrium. There is a valve called the tricuspid valve. Unbelievably important valve. It's one of those valves that tends to fail a lot, and so people have what we call mitral valve regurg. I'm sorry, tricuspid valve regurg. You can get mitral valve too. It's over here. But as the heart squeezes, it shoves this blood through the tricuspid valve, which is another check valve, because blood can go this way through it, but not back. So when it squeezes, the blood flows into here, and then as the heart squeezes again, that second squeeze, that lub-dub, the second squeeze slams this shut. Actually, when you hear your heart beating, the second sound you hear, the bub, the second part there is this thing shutting, slamming shut, and then the blood is then shoved in here to the pulmonary valve, and then into the pulmonary artery. Now, I know that I said that arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry low oxygen blood, but there's one exception to that, and that's after the heart, between the lungs. The pulmonary artery is taking blood away from the heart, but in this case it's low oxygen, and it goes to the lungs, right? One goes this way and one goes this way to your two lungs. Now, it is going away from the heart, so it is an artery, but it's carrying low oxygen. It's the only place in the whole circulatory system where arteries carry low oxygen blood, right? It goes here to the lungs, they do the whole thing out there, and then they come back through the pulmonary veins, and they're the opposite too, because veins are supposed to carry low oxygen, but in this case they're coming to the heart. Veins go to the heart, right? But in this case they're coming to the heart, and they're carrying high oxygen blood because it just came back from the lungs. There's two over here, the two pulmonary veins here and the two here, and they shove themselves into the left atrium, okay, and then the left ventricle, and then back out to the body. Now, it goes right atrium, right ventricle, lungs, left atrium, left ventricle, the rest of the body. Now, you need to know this, okay? And then in between, after it leaves, when it's in the lungs, the carbon dioxide gas comes out of the blood, and the oxygen gas goes back in, and so you got oxygenated blood coming back in here. Now, this is happening to you constantly. You have been having a heartbeat since about 6 months or 6 weeks after conception, and it will continue going until you dead. In fact, that's usually one of the dead giveaways that you're dead is your heart stops beating, right? So this process happens non-stop, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but it happens non-stop in your body. Low oxygen blood comes into the right atrium from the superior and the inferior vena cava, goes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, goes from there through the pulmonary valve to the lungs, comes back from the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, then through the mitral valve into the left ventricle, then from there to the aortic valve and out to the body. Okay. Now these valves are interesting, and notice how they're all kind of lined up right here. They are kind of all in the same area, but they separate the areas of the heart. The heart has what we call four chambers. What the heart has what we call chambers. There are four of them: the right and left atrium, the right and left ventricle. But you need to know the order in which they go. Okay. We always, the beginning is usually considered to be the right atrium. So the way to remember this is the atrium before the ventricle, and then from right to left. So right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. These valves separate them. They're kind of like doors between rooms, okay? But they're one way, or they're supposed to be one way. And so you go in here, then you go in here, then you go in here, then you go back out here. And the way that you exit the heart is through the aortic valve. Now, these valves can fail. I know lots of people that have had, the older you get, these valves start to fail. And if they do, then the heart's not working at 100%. It's actually having to work harder to get the same amount of blood through you, and it causes your heart to have fatigue. I know a lot of people get surgery done and have some of these valves replaced. That used to be a big deal, but now it happens all the time. They can actually replace these valves with valves from other animals. I know people that have cow valves in their heart, and it's actually saved their life, and they've gone back to having almost a normal life. When these valves don't quite shut all the way, you get what's called regurg, okay, which is short for regurgitation. The tricuspid valve and the mitral valve are the two biggest ones that have this regurg. And when the blood goes in here, when this part of the heart squeezes shut and it's supposed to shove it out through the aortic valve, some of it goes back through the mitral valve. That's the regurg. And so you're not getting as much blood flowing out of the aorta, and you're not getting as much blood in the rest of your body. And so now all of a sudden, and it doesn't take much, but now all of a sudden if you have 10% less blood flow, man, that's a big deal. And your heart is having to work harder to shove the same amount of blood to the rest of your body, and you're feeling fatigued, you're getting low oxygen, all that because this little valve right here is failing, or this little valve right here is failing, can be a huge problem. And so that's one of the diseases that people have is these faulty valves, and they have to get fixed. All right, you need to study this. I would almost encourage you to draw it or write it out, but you will be asked a question about the order of how blood flows through the heart and which one has high and low oxygen. Remember, the right is the first, is when the blood enters the heart, and it has low oxygen. As the blood is leaving the heart, that's the left side. The left side blood is leaving the heart, that's the high oxygen. And if you understand that, if you can kind of picture that in your head, it's not going to be that hard. But you need to quiz yourself, because this is something they're going to ask you questions about. Okay. Here's another look at it. The systemic, there are two circuits in our heart. In our circulatory system, and the heart is in between these two. The big one, the one that we all think of, is the systemic circuit, because that's the one where it's just what's in our body, right? Here's our body systems. The blood leaves the heart. This is the systemic circuit. The blood leaves the heart. It goes down through here, goes to our body systems, come back to our heart. Right, that's the systemic heart or the circuit. But there is the pulmonary circuit. It's much smaller. It has the lungs. It goes from the heart to the lungs and back, right? So it leaves the heart, it goes to the lungs, and comes back to the heart. Now, those two, the blood literally flows, in both of these systems all the time, and you're doing this constantly, and you need this flow. In fact, the better the flow, the better that you're going to behave, and anything, or the better you're going to feel, the better health you're going to have. And anything that restricts this blood flow is creating huge problems. In fact, I think it's still the leading cause of death of Americans is stuff that restricts this blood flow. Somewhere, somehow, something causing a blood flow problem is what kills more people in the United States than anything else. And so it's an important thing to know, right? So there are some factors. The first one is the blood pressure. If the blood pressure is too low or too high, then we have a problem. If the blood pressure is too low, it means you're just not getting enough oxygen and stuff everywhere, and that can ultimately lead to death. It's a little bit slower. One of the problems we have with high blood pressure is that as blood pressure gets too high, it can do a couple of things. It can blow out some of these. It's pushing it so hard that it literally ruptures some of these things. But it's mostly like capillaries in your brain that rupture, and that causes stroke. It can actually rupture a vessel in your heart. See, on the outside of the heart, the blood has to actually leave the aorta, go all the way around just to get back to the outside of the heart, because the heart's a muscle and it needs blood too, and it doesn't get it from here. It actually has to get its blood kind of a weird roundabout way, which just seems kind of silly, but whatever. And so if your heart is starving for oxygen, the muscles can die, and then the heart stops working, and then you die, right? So we keep an eye on blood pressure. I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you go to the doctor, you kids, you're healthy, so who knows? But the older you get, the more you keep an eye on your blood pressure, and the older you get, your blood pressure goes up, and I'll explain why in a minute. But keep an eye on your blood pressure. It's one of the things that doctors do. They look at your blood pressure, and it is a very good indicator of health. And the less healthy you are, the higher your blood pressure should be. Now, I'm not saying if you got high blood pressure that you're unhealthy necessarily, but it is something to keep an eye on. And so, blood pressure, which is, literally how much pressure is being exerted on the blood as it leaves the heart and starts going out to the body, that is something to keep an eye on, right? There are several things that affect it, including what's called peripheral resistance, which is how much resistance is there in let me go back here. How much resistance is there in all of the arteries of the heart? Okay. Young, healthy, clear, open arteries don't give much resistance because they're healthy. But the older you get, something happens. Stuff builds up right in here. Where are we going? Right here. Stuff builds up right here, and it causes there to be resistance, and that creates a real issue. The elasticity of the heart. Okay, these muscles, let's go back here one more time. These muscles, they tend to become a little harder. It's called hardening of the arteries, and they don't open and close as much, so it creates more resistance. The volume of blood, how much your heart is working, these are all things that affect your blood pressure. And by the way, the highest is right here at the aortic valve in the left ventricle. The aortic valve gets a lot of punishment, and it's one of those things that can go bad fast. The highest pressure is right here at the left ventricle, right here. That's the highest pressure. It squeezes out into the aorta, so the aorta gets it. That's why it's so big, because it gets a lot of that pressure. The lowest pressure is right here in the right atrium. As the blood is coming back, it's literally, to some degree, it's like, come on, God, come on, blood, get back in here. So all those things like the check valve and the squeezing of your muscles and the moving around, that's important to try to get that blood back in here so they can start going through here and get oxygenated again. So lowest pressure in the right atrium, highest pressure in the left ventricle. Okay. Blood volume can be affected. Blood volume can reduce for all kinds of things. If you sweat too much, sweat is ultimately made of fluid that is moved around your body by the blood. And if you sweat a lot, then you're actually concentrating the blood and lowering your blood pressure. It's not a good thing. If you bleed too much, you can have a reduced blood volume, and that reduces blood flow and blood pressure. Now you may be thinking, oh, if I ever have high blood pressure, I'll just bleed myself. But that's a bad thing. You do not want to lose any blood. Your body knows how much blood it needs. Now, I donate blood often. I donate blood on a constant basis. My goal this year for 2021 was to donate blood as often as I can, because I have very special blood. It's O negative, meaning anybody can take it. And so the more blood I give, the more lives can be saved with my blood, and I'm very happy to do that. So yes, that reduces my blood volume as well, but that is controlled and monitored, and they only do it every so often. So that can happen, but it's a good thing. It's actually healthy for you to, when you get a certain age, it's actually healthier for you to donate blood, but that's another story. Things can cause your blood volume to increase, such as retaining water because you've eaten too much salty foods. We eat way too much salt in our diet in the United States. And one thing that you will need to start doing the older you get is monitor your salt intake. Now, I taught myself a long time ago when I was a kid, really, to not eat so much salt. But so I don't normally add salt to my diet, but I can tell when I eat salty foods at my age now, I'm in my 50s, I can tell that it causes me to feel, yeah, not feel good. So things like that. Other things can cause your blood volume to increase. Certain medications, that sort of thing. There's this thing called a homeostatic mechanism. Homeostatic means your body's just trying to maintain its just standard way that it operates, just kind of maintaining a stable internal environment. That's literally what homeostatic means. And so your body tries to do things to change the blood pressure, or and put your body back normal, but sometimes that ends up increasing the blood pressure by increasing the blood volume. There's just all kinds of things going on, and excuse me, it can get dangerous. And if you live a very unhealthy lifestyle, meaning you sit around and don't do much all day long and you eat very unhealthy foods, eventually your heart's not going to be able to compensate for that, and you're either going to have a heart attack or a stroke. Like I said, leading cause of death in the United States. Um, Vascular resistance is another thing. Whenever you see the word vascular, you need to think of your blood vessels. And so the resistance is very simple. Okay, let me go back up here because I'm going to show you down here. But look, imagine that every time blood tries to flow past the inside walls of this artery, there's friction, and that slows it down. Okay, so vascular resistance refers to that. How far? What's the length of the blood vessels, right? What's the diameter of the blood vessels? Okay, are they wide or short? Are they wide or narrow? Are the blood vessels longer or shorter? The further it has to go, there's more resistance. How thick is the blood? The blood is called viscosity, but you can just think of it as thickness. How thick is the blood? Thicker blood is harder to push through these tubes, these arteries, than thin blood. And that's why people, when they get older, they tend to take blood thinners. And it's caused by lots of things, but there's chemicals that your body makes sometimes to make your blood thinner, and you quit making them the older you get. But it also has to do with diet. Blood that's full of fat, because you have a very fatty diet, can cause higher viscosity in your blood. So you need to start thinking about that. There's a reason that we tell you to eat the way we think you should eat. It's healthier for these very reasons. Okay, and then of course the vessel radius, which refers once again to the how big around the hole is here, and that's controlled by the muscles, which work great when you're young, but when you're older, the muscles don't work so well, and they tend to make your arteries smaller. Okay, which means the blood pressure is higher. All right. Actually, we've already talked about this. We'll just talk about it again. Again, the viscosity of the blood is how thick is the blood. That's basically what it means. And there are things in blood that can thicken it up. And sometimes thicker blood is okay, but a lot of times thicker blood means a problem. All right. The vascular resistance. Notice the difference in the diameter around here. Versus here, this one has a much smaller diameter, which means that the blood vessels are going to be, or the blood is going to flow through it more slowly, or have more resistance as the blood flows, which means the heart has to push harder. Sometimes that's important, like if you're fighting or running, or this is something that is caused by adrenaline. Adrenaline causes these things to what we call vasoconstrict. But also, a life of eating too much of the wrong foods can cause atherosclerosis, which causes this automatically to be smaller. So vasodilation is when they open up, and they can give you medications that are called vasodilators to help open up your blood vessels as much as they can to help you out. But at some point, they do what they can. Atherosclerosis is a disease that starts to build up. We're all getting it because we eat animal products, and as we eat animal products, these cholesterol, which is important, your body needs cholesterol, but we get way too much of it, and it starts to stick to the walls of the arteries, and over the course of years it builds up. And imagine blood flowing through here. Heck yeah, there's tons of room. Right here though, what happens? You can think of this as like an interstate. If you got plenty of room, car's going to go like crazy. But if you try to put the same number of cars through right here, you're going to get a traffic jam, and traffic jams equal heart attacks or strokes. Now, this isn't necessarily for everybody. There's a genetic component to this. Sometimes people genetically don't have as much atherosclerosis as others. So there are people that are just sadly more susceptible to having heart attacks and strokes. This also has to do with your lifestyle. Do you sit around all day, or do you exercise, and are you active? It depends on what you eat. Are you eating plenty of fruits and vegetables? Or are you eating more junk food and animal products? More junk food and animal products causes this to build up. Cholesterol levels are directly related to blood sugar levels. So how much sugar do you eat in your diet? There's so much going on here, and we're still learning, but we do know that a healthy diet and exercise reduces this buildup, and it keeps you basically healthier and alive longer. So atherosclerosis is bad, so do something about it. All right. Vascular resistance, again, is the length of the blood vessel. Okay, high pressure right at the beginning, but just the very fact that you're pushing it down this blood vessel lowers the pressure. And so the longer the blood vessel there is, the greater the pressure has to be on this side to get enough pressure over here on this side. So now we can't shorten our blood vessels. I mean, no, it's got to get down to my legs, right? So that's not something we can do much about, but we do know that the length of the blood vessel affects blood flow and creates vascular resistance. Okay, all right, that is actually it. So just a quick review here. Difference between arteries and veins. Oxygen, which one of these carry high oxygen and low oxygen? Same thing in here. Where's the high oxygen and the low oxygen? Where's the pressure? High pressure and low pressure. So high pressure, high oxygen, low pressure, low oxygen. Something to think about, right? That'll help you remember it. Remember the two circuits, the systemic and the pulmonary, and how they work. And remember that in between going from the heart to the rest of the body, arteries carry high oxygen blood, but going from the artery to the lungs, they carry low oxygen blood, and the veins are the opposite as well. Okay. And then just think of some of these factors that affect blood flow in your body. Things like blood volume, blood pressure, resistance, the viscosity or the thickness, okay, this stuff here. That's all this important stuff for you to keep in mind. Now, that's going to be it, so I'm going to stop the recording now. Good luck. Go see how you do on the Check Yourself quiz. Thank you.